Hey, everybody. I promised myself after Trump won the election that I wasn't going to react to every atrocity he commits, partly because it'd be impossible to keep up, I suppose, but mostly because I don't think it's helpful to just come on here and rage about him every day. So I haven't done that really. My advice has been that for people who care about protecting our democracy, it might be wise to choose our battles. And I've even suggested that maybe we could each pick an issue or two that we care deeply about and focus on those things, just to keep some sort of emotional balance over the next 4 years. So I was looking forward to modeling that behavior on here by not overreacting to Trump's first day in office. But as it turns out, I don't think it's possible to overreact. Things got real dark real fast yesterday. So here I am. I'm already enraged by this guy. So I've got to talk about it, but I'm going to try not to just rage about it. I'm going to try to suggest a few things that we can do. So I want to look back at yesterday at the most obviously awful thing that Trump did. Um, I've been warning for quite a while now that if he's elected, Trump planned to pardon the January 6th rioters. And I made a video almost a year ago in March where I played a clip of Trump saluting while a recording of a choir made up of January 6th defendants sang. And he called them hostages. And he suggested strongly back then that he would pardon them if he got elected. And I don't use the word obscene all the time on this channel, but I used it yesterday, and it looks like I used it in that video from back in March. Sometimes that's the only word that I can reach for to describe the way that people cooperate with Trump in defiling things that most of us hold sacred. And that's what I saw going on in that video. So people have known that this would happen if they voted for Trump. And they voted for him anyway. But even I didn't think that he would pardon or commute the sentences of anyone who actually physically assaulted a cop. And I wasn't alone in thinking that. Apparently, J.D. Vance didn't think that he would do that either.
Things with you. January 6th pardons, President Trump says there's a process. Where is the line drawn on who will and wouldn't be considered for a pardon?
I think it's very simple. Look, if you protested peacefully on January the 6th and you've had Merrick Garland's Department of Justice treat you like a gang member, you should be pardoned. If you committed violence on that day, obviously you shouldn't be pardoned. And there's a little bit of a gray area there, but we're very much committed to seeing the equal administration of law. And there are a lot of people, we think, in the wake of January the 6th who were prosecuted unfairly. We need to rectify that.
So Vance was either lying or even he didn't think that Trump would go that far. But that's exactly what he did last night, not even one full day into his presidency. And so far, I haven't heard Vance challenge him on this thing that he obviously shouldn't have done, according to Vance. So this is where we find ourselves. As of last night, we live in a nation now where the president has either pardoned or commuted the sentences of people who committed violence on his behalf. Violence against police officers. And as of right now, I haven't checked the news in a couple hours, but I've only been able to find one Republican senator, Tom Tillis, who is willing to go on record to oppose what Trump did. Sort of softly, but at least he did oppose it. So instead, I've heard several of them use today's GOP talking points about looking forward rather than back, or saying that Joe Biden opened the door for this with the pardons that he issued. But I have to say that that's a vacuous argument. As much as it does seem like every president makes these questionable pardons on their way out the door, and I'm not talking about the ones where he preemptively pardoned people so he wouldn't be harassed. I mean, he made a lot of pardons. I haven't looked at all of them, but I don't know that I'd like a lot of them. So anyway, in no way, though, did Joe Biden or any other president before him open the door for future presidents to pardon or commute the sentences of convicted assaulters of police officers. That's just something no president would even have conceived of doing before. The moral equivalency argument only works because people want to support Trump. So they latch on to whatever excuse their politicians give them. But we need to do better than that. But really, in retrospect, I guess no one should have been surprised that he would even go that far. I mean, just as a factual matter, the American people elected a convicted criminal to the presidency. And I know what people are going to say. They'll say the crimes he was convicted of weren't worthy of being called felonies or whatever. But he was convicted of a bunch of felonies, and he was indicted for a lot more serious crimes, including his actions leading up to January 6th. And yeah, our system isn't very good at holding people in power accountable, especially presidents. But we all knew the basic parameters of what he did in the months leading up to that attack and on that day. So I've never understood how so many people who call themselves conservatives or who call themselves Christians could look at all of those things and say, well, unless he's convicted, I'm going to vote for him again. And it's not the way I thought it was supposed to work, voting. But anyway, here's the lesson from day one of Trump's second term. If you elect a convicted criminal, then you should expect him to govern like a convicted criminal. So I made a video yesterday saying that the inauguration of Donald Trump would be remembered as an obscene moment for Christians. It was conservative white Christians, by and large, who gave him his winning margins. And that's just a stunning truth that I still can't get used to. But a friend of mine who often likes my videos and tends to agree with a lot of what I say on here told me that she didn't like that one yesterday. And she didn't like it because I didn't explain why it was obscene for Christians to support Trump. And I get it. I mean, anyone coming to these videos for the first time might wonder why I'd say something like that. So if you're new to the channel, I'll just say this. I'm not always going to explain things that I think a lot of my listeners already know, but I will say this. I've written 2 books trying to explain why Christians shouldn't support Donald Trump. I wrote the first one in 2020 during the first Trump presidency, and I called it MAGA Seduction, Resisting the Debasement of the Christian Conscience. And that was kind of a dorky name. So in 2024, I wrote a second book called simply A Christian Case Against Donald Trump. Like, you couldn't be more direct than that title. And both of those books are still available on Amazon, and you can listen to the second one in its entirety by going to the playlist on this channel. The playlist is called A Christian Case Against Donald Trump. So you can just listen to it for free, or you can find it on Amazon. But if we were starting from scratch, we could look at his pardoning of rioters who assaulted cops as Exhibit 1, okay? If we're starting from scratch. This is why it's obscene to support Donald Trump in the name of Jesus. I've talked for years about how law and order means something different for authoritarians than it means to most of us. Anyone who studies authoritarian movements are going to tell you that law and order for authoritarians means keeping the others down, keeping the others in line, whoever the others are. And we often see in those sorts of systems, we see gangs of people who use violence to keep people down who might challenge the system. So the fact that Trump pardoned those very kinds of people on his first day back in office sends a really terrible message. I mean, that is just straight up authoritarianism. I'd even call it fascist, a fascist tactic, but people get uncomfortable nowadays when we call things what they are. But I did make a long video a few years ago explaining fascism to the best of my ability. And I think I'm going to probably update that one because new things have come to light. There's better examples now. But this release of violent rioters by Trump falls right in line with some of the tactics that fascists use. Whether we call the whole MAGA movement a fascist movement or not, people would debate that. But beyond the political lens, for Christians, this comes down to an issue of justice. And I covered this extensively, and I warned about it directly in my book, A Christian Case Against Donald Trump, that I just mentioned. I included a chapter called The Way of Justice versus the Way of the Oppressor. So rather than repeat all of that here, I'd encourage you to go to that playlist on my channel. You can listen just to that chapter if you'd like. But in a nutshell, Donald Trump's approach to justice is explicitly anti Christian. And it's regrettable, to say the least, that Christians talk about law and order while voting for him. I drive all around the state of Minnesota for my work, and it was 17 below zero today while I was working. And I've seen dozens of a certain kind of flag flying, and quite often I see it paired with a Trump flag. And I didn't know what it was, so I looked it up a while back. And it's the thin blue line flag. And I guess it's meant to support our police officers. Now, as I read more about it, I saw that people were carrying that flag that's meant to show support for police officers while they beat police officers on January 6th. So, what do we do with that? I mean, how do we make that make sense? I think the only way that I can make sense of it for myself is to just realize that for a lot of people, law and order simply means using physical force to keep the people down that they don't like. But the minute a police officer tries to insist on a little bit of order for them, then that thin blue line flag becomes just another weapon in their hands to bludgeon anyone who stands in their way, even cops. And that's life in Trump's America. People fly thin blue line flags while rejoicing that Trump has released rioters who beat up police officers. And Christians, who supposedly worship the Prince of Peace, stand outside the prison and celebrate when these violent offenders get released. I even saw a woman blowing a shofar outside the prison last night on TV. And just don't get me going on the shofar. I have a funny story about that for another day. But given all of this, given everything we're seeing, what can we do? Well, obviously, we can't change Trump's decision about the pardons. That's something the nation is going to have to live with. But we're not powerless to make a difference in dark times like this. Like, anytime I talk about what we can do, I should state the obvious Christian answer: we can pray. So, I tend to get into a lot of other things, but if I fail to say that, that's my first answer, okay? We can pray. But what else, what else can we do? How should we live in this new reality? I think we have to look at it long term. Yes, I do intend to work to throw out every Republican in 2 years who doesn't stand up to Trump in the next 2 years. But that's just kind of a short-term goal, and who knows if that'll even happen. How do we live for eternity in a moment like this? I think it all comes down to speaking truth when it comes to situations like these pardons, for instance. If we choose to speak on this issue, if this is one that we choose to speak on, then I think first of all we should learn the facts. And in this post-truth world that we're living in, a lot of people are going to start to crave the truth, I believe. Not everyone, but I believe enough people in America still care about truth, and they're going to want to seek it out. So one of the best things I think that each of us can do is to become a trusted source of truth, at least in our own areas of expertise or something that we're passionate about. So in this case, if you want to speak about, these pardons, I would say learn the facts about what happened on January 6th, first of all, and then listen to people like Michael Fanone. He was a police officer who was almost killed by the rioters, and he's been very vocal, and he testified to Congress about it. And he spoke last night on CNN about his experience, and he spoke about what it means to him and his family that 6 people who were convicted of assaulting him were just released by Donald Trump. So learn about who some of these people are who were released, about what they did, so that you can share that information truthfully. And this is just advice that I've got, and then maybe prepare to hear some really dumb responses from people that you love. Things like maybe how Joe Biden opened the door for Trump to do this because of his own pardons. And I also think the simple decision to never forget that Trump did this is going to be powerful in the future. One of his strategies, one of the strategies of anyone who tries to lead in the way that he does, is to do so many shocking things that we just start to tune those things out, or we forget about them. We can't forget this one. This one is huge. This was a big one. And one reason I make videos like this is to create a record that this thing happened and that it was outrageous when it happened, and we called it outrageous when it happened. We don't want to ever let this sort of stuff become normal. So then finally, yes, I do believe in engaging in politics, and specifically, I think the key politically is to convince congressional Republicans to do their jobs over the next 2 years, to stand up to Trump the way that they're called to do by the Constitution. And if that sounds like pie in the sky solution, I don't think it should. I don't have any illusions that Republican members of Congress are going to do the right thing simply for the sake of doing the right thing. The ones who did that are gone now. But I think we've got a lot of levers to use. And I think that needs to be the main political focus for the next couple of years. We can talk about Trump until we're blue in the face, but Congress will actually have to listen to us if we organize in the right way. So I plan to talk about how I think we can do that in another video later this week. I'm no expert on politics, but I have some ideas. But until then, I plan to keep my head up. Many of us have said all along that if Trump actually does the things that he's promised to do, those things are going to be wildly unpopular with the American people. I think a lot of people elected him thinking that he was just blowing smoke. Well, he wasn't blowing smoke about these rioters. He did pardon them, even the ones who beat cops. So the more things like this that he does, the more people are going to just hate these decisions that he's making. So on the first day he was in office, he did something that will repulse the vast majority of Americans if they pay attention. Authoritarian leaders want us to feel alone, and they want us to feel helpless to change the system, but we're not alone, and we're not helpless. I believe this. Several people in the comments yesterday said, I don't know why you're hopeful, because I am hopeful. And I'll just say this, that America is better than Donald Trump, and she's better than his MAGA movement. And I believe that she's going to remember that sooner or later. So in the meantime, let's keep our heads up, and thanks for listening.